Well, hello, David. How are you?
I'm well, Sam. I'm looking forward to this.
Yes. So, anyway, those of us watching this chat, which is what it's going to be today, welcome to David's new studio, the Tri-Island studio. And what I'm going to do first is allow David to introduce himself a little bit and tell everybody who you are and where you come from and tell us a little bit about Pancha Yoga.
Okay.
And then I'm going to do the same for me because not everybody knows me. And then I think we'll just see where the conversation goes.
Fantastic. Well, folks, my name is David Bowen, and I am from Grand Turk originally, West Road. A lot of you know me working with the Department of Culture for many years, and now I work with Grace Bay Club as the Wellness Director. I now run the Tri-Island Yoga Studio, and we teach what's called the Pancha Yoga Method. It's a very simple concept. Pancha means 5. The fact is, there are 5 elements, there are 5 senses, there are 5 states of mind, there are 5 spinal movements. Your spine can only move forward, bending, back bending, side bending, twisting, and extension. So every posture is based around those 5 movements. There are other 5s, but you'll learn that when you come to the classes. So we offer classes here daily and every day of the week, 7 days a week. If you want to get in contact with me, I don't have a website right now, but you can email me at triislandyoga@gmail.com. Very simple, TRIISLAND@gmail.com. And so I'm very happy to offer the community. For many years I've been doing yoga, but I've never had my own space, so I'm very proud to have this space, and I do welcome you. If you want to move from that unhealthy lifestyle to a more productive and happier lifestyle, check me out.
Thank you, David. And now I'm going to introduce myself. So I'm Dr. Sam Slattery, and I've resided here in the Turks and Caicos for 35 years. I'm originally from the United Kingdom. I trained as a doctor in the care of sick patients and sick people at St Thomas's Hospital in London, which is one of the old, traditional, very didactic teaching hospitals. Over the years, I practice a very broad range of medicine because I've lived here in a very small island community. It's grown around me, though. So I started out about 3,000 people in the Turks and Caicos in Providenciales, and we're probably now about 45,000. Nobody's quite sure, to be honest. During that period, as I say, lots of different types of medicine by necessity, so I'm a bit of an old-fashioned doctor with lots of different skill sets. Somewhere in my 40s, that all caught up with me. I became unwell, and I started a slightly different journey, and that is a journey which allowed me to discover how to become healthy again. And the end of that journey was a couple of extra master's degrees, an immense amount of reading and education as I drifted from being simply a doctor that fixes people who are ill and sick into somebody who was more interested in making people healthy. And ultimately, that's led to me producing a book. So the Body Cooperative is available, and it's a very simple roadmap based on not only my own experience, but many thousands of consultations. That roadmap allowing you to become healthier. Doesn't matter what your current state of health is, the whole point of the book is to allow you to improve it. So this is not really a talk about just marketing the book or marketing David. Really what we want you to be able to do is to listen to 2 people with hopefully quite a lot of grey hair, which represents, hopefully, as I say, some wisdom, because we've both been in the healing space for a very long time. And what we really want to do is share with you some of our thoughts and ideas. And perhaps I would say that if looking at us, we both look pretty good for our age, and that didn't come by accident. Is that a fair comment?
That's a fair comment. That's a fair comment.
The last thing I want to say is that the book is also divided into 5 elements of being healthy. So there's diet, which is critical because it balances out the neuroimmune system and the bacterial colony in your gut. Exercise, which is, I think, where we'll spend quite a lot of time in our discussion today. And a reason for that is I'm a big fan of yoga for several different reasons. Sleep, not really something we're going to chat about today, but just know you need it. About 7 hours is the appropriate length of time. Me time, which is self-reflection, and certainly has a part in yoga. And finally, stress management, and that certainly has a part where yoga can play an important part in your life. So the nice thing about being in this studio and sharing time with David is that we get to hit 3 of the key elements of being healthy: exercise, me time and self-reflection, meditation even, and stress management. So, David, there's an introduction from us both. I've been one of your students over the years. You're not the only person I've learned from, but I practice yoga on and off like most people. I've not managed to make it a daily practice, but certainly when things are not going well for me, I try and go back to it. So maybe, why don't you share with everybody and me what it is that firstly brought you to yoga and why you think it's so beneficial?
Okay, that's a lot right there. All right. Well, first of all, this past July has been my 50th year of doing yoga. So I started when I was 14 by accident. I was doing the martial arts. I knew a little bit about Eastern philosophy of mindful meditation because of karate and kung fu. But I discovered a book by a monk called Tuesday Lobsang Rampa. He was a Tibetan monk. And he was discussing all the process of going through, of breathing, of meditation, of postures to deal with the internal health and the mental health. And I found it fascinating. It happens so that this is now in Freeport, Grand Bahama, but in Nassau, there was a Shivananda ashram that's been there from the 60s, right? So I was able to meet some people from there and get some books by the Swami. And I learned yoga, and that changed my whole life. So I've been doing it since I was 14 years old, and it continued right through until now, where I'm finally using it as my main sort of income. I mean, it's now my lifestyle. I've been dying to do that for many years. Luckily, when I moved back home, I was able to come into a community of expats who were into yoga. Unfortunately, my own people did not really accept the yoga. So I want to address that because too often people place these labels on yoga and they are not accurate. It's not a religion. So if you are a Christian, it has nothing to do with your Christianity unless you want to become a Hindu or you want to go into Buddhism. So the idea behind yoga, the word yoga means to yug, to join. What do you join? Your mind and your body. So using your body to connect with your mind, and what is the key? What is the bridge? It's your breath. So the breath is the bridge between the mind and the body. And too often, I think people assume that because of the Indian or the Hindu background, and they see the many idols, and they have this, because of the Bible saying no graven images, they don't understand that these idols or these images are just different aspects of our personality, of who we are within nature. So once you start to understand, so it's important not to be ignorant when you dismiss yoga, because the fact is we are a very unhealthy nation for many reasons, and yoga is one of the things, like you mentioned earlier, about it connects all aspects, because people assume that being healthy is only physical, but if you're not mentally stable you cannot maintain or sustain your physical body. It has a lot to do with connecting your mind, body, and spirit. And the word spirit, spiritus means breath. We don't think about that. It doesn't mean God, or it is another high level of who we are. But don't assume that spirit means something religious. It's about the breath. So when you start thinking of mind, body, spirit, you're also thinking mind, body, breath. If you control your spirit, control your breath, then you control your mind. You control your mind, you control your body, you control that, then you have a better lifestyle of happiness. It's not about how long you live, but the quality of the days you live. If I was living for only a month, and every day in that month was a beautiful day, and you also live in that month, but only 1 week out of that month, you had a wonderful, happy time. Who had the better life? So don't think that what we're doing here is to prolong our lives, which it will do in any way, but it's about the quality of your daily life. So when you wake up until you sleep, how much of that day were you really happy or at peace, or were you struggling with stress? So I want to welcome anyone to come to the studio. Right now, I think many doctors are telling people to come because they have high blood pressure, they have diabetes, they have mental issues, they have breathing issues, and they said, go to yoga. So don't let your religion stop you from being healthy, because if you're a healthy person, that means you have more time to serve your God. Isn't that the best thing for you? So I would recommend yoga for anyone that's struggling physically, energetically, emotionally, or mentally.
Yeah, no, that's really, so that's very interesting, and boy, there is so much to unpack in there. So the first thing is, and the reason I really wanted to talk to you is because I do have knowledge of of yoga, so I understand that it encompasses a whole person. That's the first thing, and that's really what I write about in my book. So health is about being a balanced human being. So you have to have mental health and you have to have physical health, and we sort of always used to talk about them as if they were separate, and people still do talk about them as if they're separate. So we talk about doctors who look after your physical health, and then we talk about psychologists, psychiatrists who look after your mental and health, as if somehow your mental health and the way you think and feel about the world has no influence on your physical health, which is completely incorrect. So very quickly, without getting all sciencey, too much science in the book, so you can read the book a little bit more detail. Essentially, we're run by something called the neuroimmune system. The neuro part is the nervous system of the body. One brain, second brain in your gut. There's much nervous tissue in that second brain as there is in your spinal cord. And it acts as a brain to the bacterial colony that lives in the gut, which is a very important part of us, a meta-organism, not really truly human. And then the other thing that lives in our gut is our immune system. So the nervous system in the gut and 85% of your immune cells that live in the gut are sort of intertwined like this. And then they influence the way that your brain and your mind works. And they influence everything from memory to learning abilities to how well you sleep. And importantly, they also influence your mood and many, many other aspects of how we live. So the sort of first concept so I guess what I'm intrigued about here is that I think yoga, which has been around how many thousand years? Yeah, so since we don't know, yes. But it's a very long time.
6,000 years.
Probably 5,000 years. So it's interesting because I always tell people something doesn't last 5,000 years unless it's good for you. It's a bit like acupuncture. Who wants needles stuck in them unless it does some good? And it's stood the test of time. So clearly it works because we haven't carried on practicing acupuncture, which is now moved into the West as well, if it didn't work. So yoga works. And it works, I think, because without understanding the science, earlier peoples who occupied the earth, part of our evolutionary process, knew that the mind and the body were connected instinctively, and then worked out how to balance it. And then we got invaded by science somewhere in the Western world, somewhere in the early 1900s, and everything had to be scientific. And science sort of did away with some of the, if you want, mental and sort of health aspects of the human, and we got into measuring stuff, and this was tough to measure, so we couldn't measure it, so we ignored it, we pretended it didn't exist. But of course, once you understand that the neuroimmune system runs us, and once you understand that this is the gut and the brain connected, which they are, and once you understand that they both have to be in balance, because if they're not, then you're you're having disease, then everything starts to go wrong. So the nice thing about yoga for me as a physician is that I can send patients to you and practitioners like you, because essentially you're teaching people to do exactly what you expressed to me, which is to bring their mind and body back together, to learn how to breathe properly, because I'm amazed at how many people in my office, when we sit and do literally 10 simple breaths, they can't. So I'd like you to talk about that in a second, because breathing is the root of all of what we do, you and I. And then through that breath work, as you say, we bring balance and connectivity to the brain and the body. So that was one thing I sort of picked up there. The other thing that's really interesting, and I sort of write about this a little bit in my book, and I address it directly. So a lot of people say, no, I can't do yoga. And they have a sort of an image of sort of some young individual, probably wearing a leotard or some sporty outfit, bending themselves into pretzel-type shapes, and sort of, and just generally doesn't fit the model that perhaps most of us, because most of us can't get into pretzel shapes, and most of us don't wear sports outfits, like the sort of image that a lot of people have about young yoga practitioners who are learning the art. And I sort of want to pull that out a little bit more, because here I got this boy from Grand Turk in a tiny little country in the middle of nowhere, who suddenly by chance ends up becoming, I guess, a very well-renowned yogi. Tell me about that, because I think it's important that we speak to young Turks Islanders and older Turks Islanders about those two things. Number one, it doesn't matter where you come from or what your belief system is. Yoga is a practice that can be glued onto anything. It's a way of living on a daily basis. And secondly, okay, I'm 55 and my tummy's way too big. Can I come and do yoga? Can I gain something from joining one of your classes?
Okay. Wow. Okay, first of all, let's discuss yoga and the whole concept of it being something alien. A lot of our people, we drive Japanese cars. A lot of our women, they wear hair from India. Does that make them Buddhist? Or does that make them Hindu? All right. So if you're driving a Japanese car, it does not make you a Buddhist. If you have your hair from India, it does not make you a Hindu. So if you're doing yoga, it's just another thing, Okay. That's the first thing. The other thing is that, for me, when I started doing yoga at 14, around 15, my mentor, her name was Lois Seiler. Her name is Lois Seiler. She's still alive. She saw me as a young boy in high school. Her kids were also in the same high school. She was a dancer from New York who had moved to the Bahamas with her husband to be the producers of the casino show in Freeport. And they were looking for young, quote-unquote, Bahamian dancers, right? So she saw me. She said, you have some talent. And she took me under her wing and started training me. I became her lead dancer. I worked for her and her husband for many years in the casino in Freeport. As a matter of fact, on the day of my graduation from high school, I did a show, the first show at the casino, ran across the street, got my diploma, and ran back for the second show. So I was dancing from I was 16, 17 years old. Then a few years later, some scouts from New York came, and they saw me from Joffrey Valley and Albanelli, and I had a full scholarship. So yoga took me into dance. I gave up a scholarship to go to Cornell to study yoga and dance in New York. Of course, my parents had a serious heart attack. I gave up Cornell. But in any case, so I danced for many, many years, and I ended up in Japan 1986 on a one-year contract. It was so fabulous, I signed another year. And then 10 years later, I'm still in Japan. But my 9th year, I was doing cats. And I got injured. I got a really bad back injury. The whole time I was doing yoga, but it was more meditation, more breathing. I was already dancing, so I didn't really need the physical yoga. But here I was now laying on my back, and I was told that maybe you wouldn't dance again. So while laying down, I started to do some yoga. Where your mind goes, your energy flows. So positive reinforcement. But also I realized that I could still do certain movements with my spine. And that's how the whole thing about the 5 spinal shapes. So I started to develop the movement of my spine to increase my mobility and flexibility and strength by just laying down and doing all 5 spinal shapes. And that's how the Pancha Yoga method started, but it was only for me. I didn't really teach it as a method until very recently. So after leaving Japan in 96, going back to the US to become a chef, I went to school to learn natural food cooking, to open my own restaurant, you know. And I did a study, a survey, and people were not interested. This is 1997, right? They were not interested at that time, right? And so I decided, okay, it's not going to happen. So I moved back home to be with my grandmother in Grand Turk. I co-managed the Sitting Pretty, it's now called the Osprey, for Reg Badania at that time. And someone told Beaches about my background in theater and dance, and so I came over to Provo to be their entertainment manager. And I started teaching yoga here, and that's how I've been kind of getting into the community here. Now, what I'm really happy about is that finally people are understanding. For a while, I had many people come to me and told me I was a heathen, and that what I was doing was inviting the devil into me. I had people, parents, take their kids away from the kids' yoga classes because they thought it was something, you know. But what I also realized, I'm thinking, I'm trying to help these people, and I would go to a funeral, and as you know, at our funerals, you know, we have the wakes, and there's lots of food served and stuff, and I realized the same food they're serving at the wake and the repast after is the same food that killed the person. So it clicked on me that our people don't know anything about how important diet is and exercise is. We assume that it's a gym, and then we forget that our ancestors were actually working in the fields. They were going to the boats, they were fishing, they were walking, and we assume that that was not a very good lifestyle. We think just sitting around, clicking on televisions, and we can hire someone to clean our yards, hire someone to do our dishes, and etc. We go from our air-conditioned house to our air-conditioned car to our air-conditioned office and back, and we never exercise. At the same time, we will pay a fortune to go to a gym, to walk on a treadmill, when you can just walk down the road. We do all these things at the same time, chop your own yard. So I thought that one of the best ways is that I'm not going to preach, but I'm going to live my life. I'm going to live, and if you see that the quality of my life is what you want, then, so I never advertise. It's just a matter of that. And I think that our people now are so sick, and they assume that it's a natural thing, and they think that it's a pill for every ill. In reality, it's a lifestyle change, and your book really addresses all of those things, those 5 important things that we need to do. So going back to yoga, you don't have to be thin, skinny, or flexible. I always hear, oh, I can't start yoga, I'm not flexible. That's when I want you. I don't want you to be flexible.
Yes, exactly.
Because yoga is not about the flexibility. It's about the flexibility of your mind to know that you're not flexible.
Yeah.
So it's trying to understand what I call your F-mass, F-M-A-S-S. And we all have our individual F-mass. So, what's the first? F is your individual flexibility, which is about how your muscles and your tendons move. Mobility, M, it's about your joints and your ligaments. A, your adaptability. How can you adapt to the posture? Not to look like me or your neighbor, but to your own body based on your mobility, flexibility. Then you have your strength. How strong are you to go deeper into the posture or not? And then how stable are you? How grounded? That's your F-mass. So once you understand your F-mass, everyone in class will be doing their own individual yoga. Too often, yoga now has become this thing where you have to follow what the teacher is doing. If he has his head to his knee, then you want to, or your next door neighbor got his head to his knee, when it's not that, because how your bones are connected chooses how far. So flexibility is not about the body, but how flexible you are mentally to accept your reality. So being fat it will definitely help you, because a lot of times if you have a hard time with diet, it's because you have no self-restraint. You can't stop yourself because your mind, yes? So you are the thinker of your thoughts. You are not your thoughts. So your thoughts create your emotions. Your emotions determine your behavior. So if you are to think of your thoughts, you control your thoughts, you control your emotions, you control your behavior. And so that's how so when you come to class, I absolutely love when people come and they have no experience, because then I can really help them to find their F-mass and help them discover that place. So it doesn't matter how big, how small, if your yoga has nothing to do with flexibility. And in fact, a dancer, a contortionist, a gymnast can do all those postures. You know, what happens is that the postures affect your muscles, your ligaments, your tendons, and your vital organs. How you're moving, you're massaging your stomach, your spleen, your liver, your gallbladder, your pancreas. So it all revolves around the spine, because your arms and legs don't have any vital organs. It's all here. So anyone can do yoga. I have students who started when they were 79. I have students who began when they were 300 pounds. So don't be discouraged when you see some cute girl in a leotard going. As a matter of fact, maybe she can do all the postures, but maybe psychologically up here, she's not there. Maybe she might be sitting like this, but thinking about her next tweet. She's not present. So don't assume that because they are flexible or looking like that, it has nothing to do with yoga.
Yeah.
Yoga is just about yoga is the art and science of self-realization.
Yes. I love listening to you, because I wish I was that eloquent, you know. It took me 5 years to write this book, and then I had to edit it, because I listen to other people and I think, oh boy, I wish I could be so succinct and eloquent. I lose the message because I talk too much. So there's just beautifully put. I love it. I absolutely love it. And it's so important to me that understand what you're talking about here, because first thing, when we talk about exercise, it's actually defined in science these days. I'm sure you're aware of this, but I'm going to say it because most people won't be. So all the elements you just described are all considered individual parts of an exercise regime. So if you go to somebody who actually is a really good personal trainer, they will address, as you do in yoga, all those elements. And they are defined within sports medicine and exercise medicine as a science. So that's the first thing. So the other thing is, if nothing else comes out of our talk today, that people understand that it's all about connecting your mind to your body and teaching people awareness. It doesn't even have anything to do with fitness or anything else, because if you can just make that connection again, if you can just carve some space in your life where you can reflect upon how you are, you're going to be in a better place. So that's a whole chapter. It's called Me Time. And Me Time can be very active like this. I mean, one of the things I love about yoga is when you have a really good session, you come out because you've connected to you. Like, I'm like, oh, I didn't even know that bit hurt, or I didn't even know that was that stiff, or, oh, it's really interesting. I can't actually do that today, but I could last week. Or just laying there at the end, you're like, wow, I'm a bit blue today. I don't feel so good. I'm a bit depressed, or my brain's a bit foggy. All the things I talk about, people teaching themselves or learning the skill of just some self-reflection. Like, how am I doing? You know, one thing I talk about is like every day you develop this practice. And I do it every day. So I wake up, and then I sort of let my brain wake up a little bit more. And then I ask myself 4 questions. How do I feel physically? How do I feel mentally? Am I waking up feeling clear-headed this morning? Do I feel like I'm ready to wake up? And how do I feel emotionally? Do I feel balanced, or am I a bit sad, or am I a bit whatever? And then perhaps the most important is why. Like, why do I feel like this today? And then I can reflect that back to yesterday. Poor sleep, stayed up too late, had a difficult day yesterday, played too much tennis. That's my main yoga. I love tennis because tennis does what yoga does. And since I started playing tennis, my yoga practice physically, and yoga is not about physical strength, but my yoga practice improved, and I can now actually stand on one leg, which I've never been able to do in years and years and years. All right, I'm just sort of a source of entertainment in a yoga class, which, trust me, and I would say that to people, you just come, I can't say, you think, oh, Dr. Slattery been practicing for years, be able to stand on one leg. No, I could not stand on one leg for years till I started playing tennis. Now I can stand on one leg. But I also found that my yoga practice improved my tennis. Yes. All the same sort of movement and control. So it brought enormous physical benefit to me, but what it really does is it allows me check-in time every day in a sort of more formalized fashion. And it taught me to check in, and then it taught me how to breathe. Because most of us, I'm sitting here thinking, even now, not relaxed, because I'm not taking a nice big breath whilst we're talking. I'm watching you, you're taking nice big breaths, and I'm sort of breathing at the top of my lungs. But when you do take a deep breath, it winds down and balances up your neuroimmune system. Yes. So that's something else I just wanted to touch on quickly, which is, so we talk about practice in lots of different spheres. So we talk about the practice of Buddhism. So as a Buddhist, I practice. You talk about the practice of yoga and the practice of meditation. And so one of the things I wanted to hear your thoughts about, because this is how I've always thought about it, is that it is truly practice. So come in here to your studio, or I might sit at home and meditate. Or I might just be reading a passage and sort of from anything. It's not always Buddhism. It'll be because I read all sorts of texts from all sorts of different people. And then I sit and think about it. And for me, what I'm doing is I'm teaching myself skills in a sort of, if you want, a boxed, sort of a protected time in my life. I'm teaching myself skills that I'm going to take out in my day-to-day life. For example, once I learned how to breathe properly through pranayama in yoga, when I really get wound up, which I do, because I'm a bit of a type A perfectionist personality, I've learnt over the years that I can take that skill that I learnt here in this yoga studio, one like it, and take 10 simple, proper, deep pranayama style breaths, really fill my lungs up. And suddenly all that anxiety and anger and frustration at whatever it was, around here, often a government body that I'm having to interact with, it sort of gets better. It doesn't go away, but it's like, I can cope with that. So I think it was the point I want to make. So that's my experience. I don't know what your thought about that is. We're practicing stuff that we take into the rest of our lives.
Yes. When we get anxious and when we get all wound up, we flip on the sympathetic nervous system. That's what happens. And then we're in that state of fight and flight. Even though the situation has come down, we're still in that. But when you start to breathe, it really helps you switch back to the parasympathetic nervous system and the vagus nerve. So when you slow down your breath, but we forget that we begin birth as an in-breath and we end on an out-breath. So how I see breath is this. When I inhale, that's my birth. I keep inhaling. That's my life through childhood. I arrive at the top. And then I start to exhale. It's my decline, my old age, and then my death. And then guess what? This is my next rebirth. So if I slow down my breathing, I also slow down my lifespan. The key to breathing is to understand that the breath can be voluntary or involuntary. Throughout our days, we breathe because that's how it is. That's the autonomic nervous system, right? But if we control that, there are only a few things we can control. We can control like blinking our eyes, but the breath is an important thing. So I highly recommend, especially, I'm sure we all know that old adage when they say that, if you are stressed out or whatever, take a few deep breaths. It works. It's true. It slows you down. It makes you think. But what's even more, I think, important is that if you really think about what's your breath is really the vehicle, because the breath houses the life force. The life force is not the breath. In the same way, your car is not you, but you get into your car and the car will take you. Your breath transports the life force, the spirit, the God, whatever, the prana, the ki, the chi, throughout your body. But where does it come from? But then you look around us, we have all these trees. Those trees outside are exhaling oxygen into the atmosphere. We are breathing that oxygen from the atmosphere into our lungs. That now will diffuse into our bloodstream. Our blood will take it to the cells. They use it. They now exhale carbon dioxide. It goes back to the blood. The blood goes back into the lungs. The lungs expel back into the atmosphere. And the trees receive what we exhale. So if you stop for a moment and just go outside in your garden or just look at a beautiful tree, and that is your communication. It's just to be aware of how important the trees are to your breathing. Slow down. It helps to control your emotions. We are sometimes too often control or not have control over the emotions we need to control. There is worry, there is fear, there is anger, there is sadness, there is all these things that we have a hard time dealing with. But if you just learn to stop and watch your breath, when you start to watch your breath, because the breath can only exist in the moment. The breath cannot exist in the past or the future. And we live in those two places all the time. We have regrets or we have worry about the future. But if you breathe in the present, because time doesn't exist, time really is just this moment, followed by this moment, followed by this moment. Yeah? So the breath helps you to be present. The breath is helping you to lengthen your lifespan. And the breath also is the key to your overall health. Yes, you can exercise, you can eat right, but if you inhale, exhale, and your next inhale doesn't happen, no matter how organic the food is, no matter how much weight you can, it's all over.
We call that dead.
Yeah, you're dead.
In my profession,
Yes.
Or as the Americans would say, ultimate patient care failure.
Ultimate patient care failure. Yes. So the first thing I teach in class is how to breathe, and I give you numbers. I have a little thing I make you slow down. I view the spine as an elevator shaft. I view the breath as the elevator. Okay, going up elevator to your top floor, and then back down to your bottom floor, and then you pass each floor, and each floor is one of your endocrine glands. So breathing is the first thing you should really think about. When you're thinking about your health. Besides the diet, besides exercise, it's just to breathe.
Well, it's the fundamental. I mean, you can't diet. You can't burn the energy in food because when we have food, we have to burn it with oxygen. Back to your sporting analogy. One of the things all coaches teach top athletes to do is to breathe. My tennis coach is always shouting at me, breathe, breathe. Well, you breathe in the stroke. You'll play better tennis. I don't think it matters what you're doing. Certainly at the fundamental, you make a very fundamental and important point. Without breath, there is no life. So, but so many processes in the body require adequate oxygenation, and so many people actually don't breathe well, and so you're absolutely right. It's sort of a fundamental, foundational cornerstone of any health, if you want, lifestyle changes, is to learn how to breathe. So that's one of the great things about it. There's another great thing about yoga. Now I want to sort of shift tack a little bit, and let's just talk about the other. I think that's another very important part of the overall yoga experience, if you want, or philosophy, which is diet. So I'm going to very quickly talk about it from my point of view, but then I'm going to shut up and listen to your perspective. So what I said early on when I was introducing myself is that we're run out of the gut. So the gut is the center of the human universe, all right? Period. End of discussion, no debate, all right? In there, large bacterial colony, one of the most diverse bacterial colonies on the planet, interesting enough, probably about 3,000, 6,000, 7,000 species, but then if we talk about strains within species, it runs into the tens of thousands, and we're all very unique. So your bacterial colony is yours. It's as unique as your fingerprint. This colony has a profound influence on everything that happens in your body. Literally, it controls the way you think, it controls your mood, it controls many, many things. It does that by talking to the neuroimmune system, which lines the wall of the intestine. So they literally live next door to each other, and they chat all day long through a whole variety of different mechanisms, and we call it crosstalk. And it's just millions of messages back and forth all day long. And then the neuroimmune system in the guts transmits messages up to the brain, which is the main central processor of the rest of the body. And through immune cells, through nerves themselves, the vagus nerve particularly, and then actually just through chemicals, messengers being sent, they influence and control the brain. So, center of our universe, secondary brain up here, interestingly enough, evolved really quite late in evolutionary history. I know a lot of people struggle with evolution, but to me, I was raised a Christian. I've always thought one of the great wonderments and great truths is that Genesis talks about there was darkness and then there was light. And God, the creator, whatever your belief system is, created a process of evolution, which is so much more fantastical than the idea that it was all churned out on day one and 7 days later it was all done, which clearly, that's not the case. We can all see that if you have an open mind. But the process of evolution, much more exciting than just it was all created, in my opinion. So the higher brain that makes us very unique as humans, no question, and special, came quite late in the process. So that's an interesting idea. So I try and teach people to think about it slightly differently. This is not the center of our universe. This is. Now, okay, so I'm waffling on a little bit. What's this got to do with diet? Well, I can tell you that the easiest way to change the composition, the structure of your personal microbial colony in the gut is through diet. And if you feed it junk, which is sugar and starches and processed food essentially, you produce an inflammatory colony in very simplistic terms. So it makes the neuroimmune system in the gut wall send out messages that cause distress throughout the rest of the body, including your brain. And distress in your brain presents with cloudy thinking, emotional distress, depression, anxiety, and many other things. So diet can control your mood, the way you think, and all the rest of it. It also influences your joints and your muscles, and now we know that most diseases, including rheumatoid arthritis and all sorts of so-called autoimmune diseases, all would appear to start in the wall of the intestine, where the bacterial colony chats to the neuroimmune system. So, diet is the most fundamental thing in your life, other than what we've been talking about before. How you eat is literally who you are. We've known it since forever. I mean, everybody says Hippocrates said that 2,000 years ago. Now, I would say that whoever started yoga and so many Chinese philosophies well over 5,000 years ago had figured this out. What we eat decides what sort of human being you're going to be, even down to your mood and everything else, but it has an enormous influence on your general overall state of health because it's the primary driver of inflammation in the body. And very simplistic terms, inflammation is bad. Yes. And so you want to dampen it down. And I can tell you that the way you dampen it is to have a lot of plant fiber in your diet, because that encourages the growth of strains and species of bacteria in the gut that actually produce anti-inflammatory molecules that dampen down actively, not in a passive way, but actively quiet inflammation throughout the body. Okay, that's the science. Now tell me how that fits into the world of yoga and the sort of a much older belief system that's been around much longer than science.
Well, for me, it was when I discovered yoga, and I was told that there are certain things that I could no longer eat. So I gave up dairy, I gave up meat, and I had more plant-based stuff. So it was, for my grandmother, very distressful because all of a sudden her little boy is not eating all the food that she used to make. So I found ways to get around that. But diet definitely helped me because I didn't really suffer a lot of the issues that my friends were suffering, the headaches and migraines and asthma, weakness. I was always an active person. I'm still a very active person. I must say, for a while, I went a little overboard. I was so anal about everything I ate. How you. All right? And then in Japan, I started to understand more. Being there, and their diet is very, very, very good for me. And then when I moved back home, I had a culture shock because I couldn't find my tofu, I couldn't find a thing, so I had to adapt to it. Then I realized that really it's moderation, but understanding what and how much to eat. What I realized about my culture when I came back home is I realized that in my grandmother's day, even when I was a kid, we had certain holidays where we had lots of food. And in between, we didn't have those foods. But suddenly I realized that we're having those same holiday foods every day. So we're having Christmas dinner every day. And it's okay if you have it on Christmas, because then, okay, you have a few days, a few months to get it out. But if you have it every day, then it builds up. So diet for me is important because I understand, and like you said, I mean, I didn't, until you spoke it, I didn't realize that the gut was even more important than this brain here. But I was well aware of how diet affects your mood, affects your whole lifestyle. It affects your diseases that you get, your illnesses. We assume that these things happen naturally as we get older, but it really doesn't. Because if you really look back at your great-grandmother or grandmother or someone in your family, they really didn't get sick until much later in life. Whereas now, in your 30s and 40s, people are falling down with all these things. It's because of the lifestyle. So I try to teach about eating without being militant and saying you can't do this. But the fact is, our natural or our soul food or our local diet has too much starch, has too much sugar, has too much of the wrong oils, and has too much salt. Yeah, those are the three things that are just terrible. I think that, again, going back to yoga, these things taste good, and you become addictive to things that you really like doing. Yeah. So whereas if you have that mental control to recognize that, okay, I'll have my ice cream only on this day, but not have it every single day, then you're okay. Another thing I want to talk about is religion and diet. I know that the Seventh-day Adventists, they are plant-based. So I really appreciate that they actually recognize how important food is because they see their body as the temple. And I wish that all of us, would see that and not have the food that killed the person served. I have had meetings with ministers of government, and when I was also part of the interim administration for a few years, we'd have all these meetings, and the food there was ridiculous. I mean, it was just a fried food and this and that, And then I would see the ministers in the health ministry, having meetings and the food and the stuff there is like, so diet. Diet does not mean one of the fad diets. Diet just means basically the food that you eat, yeah? We have to stop eating too much, well, definitely too much sugar, salt, and fats. How do we break that? Because it's cultural. And the fact is, your culture is killing you. Our culture is killing us. Because, yes, maybe you might say, oh, my grandmother ate the same thing. Yes, but your grandma was walking 20 miles a day. She was hauling up some water. She was cutting. She was actually, what she was putting into her body, she was giving out through sweat. You see? So, if you think that success means I'm rich enough now to have lobster and steak every day, and I lay down in my lazy boy chair and I have my flat screen TV and my belly gets big and I have a nice car, you know, a nice big house, that's the wrong way of thinking. And it's amazing for me how much our people assume that being plump or being fat is a sign of health.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and it could, nothing could be further
Nothing
from the
could be
truth.
further. You're like,
It's
oh,
absolutely
you're too skinny, child. Come here. You're too skinny.
I spend this all the time. I literally have slimmer patients come to my office and ask me how to put on weight, and I'm like, no, please, you actually look like a human being should look, and 98% of the rest of my patients, I'm desperately trying to get them to lose weight, because whether people like it or not, and in this world of political correctness, you're not allowed to speak the truth anymore, but I'm going to speak it. If you're overweight, it's destroying your health. And what's really important, and I want to come back to this because I talk about it in the book. I mean, many of the things that we touch on here are in the book for people who want to sort of go back and relearn this or reread it, but partly because we come from the same philosophical background. We're both interested in Buddhist teachings and Buddhist philosophy, which, by the way, is not a religion. There is a religion called Buddhism. I am not a Buddhist in the sense that, from a religious point of view, because it has rules and guidelines and regulations and dogma, just like Christianity, just like Islam. All these religions have rules. I've never been interested in the rules. I'm interested in the philosophy, which you can be a Christian and be a Buddhist, believe me. So for me, it's about this sort of sense of back to bringing back balance. And what intrigued me was earlier, and I've lost my train of thought, and I hate that when I'm doing interviews. I was going to go back to something that you picked up, and it doesn't matter. It's gone. It's a live show, and we're going to leave it alone.
Okay.
So it'll pop back in my head in a minute. But so a lot of the things that we have been talking about, we're back to about diet, is this concept that yes, being plump, being overweight is okay. Oh, I know what it is. It just came to me. Okay. So this is how it becomes. This is what's fun about doing these live chats, so you don't edit things. Okay, you talked about something that's really important, and it's a question that somebody asked me in an interview that I was doing the other day. Okay, there is an enormous difference between lifespan and health span. Okay, so lifespan, we talk about how long are you expected to live, and lifespan's gone up across the world over the last few decades, primarily actually because child mortality's gone down. So lifespan, when you look at the figures for different countries, you see, the lifespan's gone up in this country or it's gone up in that country. But usually it's related, it's a mathematical calculation. We've lived 70 years and 10 and plus, I would say 70 years and 20 actually. So human beings are living to their 70s and 80s since forever, all right? But what has fundamentally changed is something that you touched on, which is if you look at that 2 generations ago, or actually I'm doing quite a lot of work in Malawi now, so I'm sort of going back to Africa, where it's a very traditional lifestyle. People remain in remarkably good health, well into their 70s and 80s. In fact, I know a particular 90-year-old I can think of who's still working. 90s, clarity of mind, clarity of vision, well into her 90s. Okay, she's not unusual. All right, and you think, Africa, everybody dies young, it's a terrible place, child. It's not true. Slim people. This is basically health span. So not only are these individuals living their 70 years and 10, but their health span, the time in which they spend being healthy, is to the last few years of their life, and then very quickly something falls apart and the system fails. But it's at the end. As you pointed out, I'm seeing children in their teens and in their 20s with diabetes and hypertension. And people say, it's inherited. And I go, no, this is lifestyle. This is the junk food that you're consuming. This is literally the way you live, and this sort of concept that this stuff's fun and it means that I can afford to buy Cheetos. I mean, Cheetos. All right, everybody loves Cheetos. The science in Cheetos is amazing. It's the sort of same level of science that sent man to the moon. Trust me, the company that made Cheetos, and that's true of all food manufacturing, by the way, and people should understand that. The money spent in getting you addicted to a product in a supermarket is unbelievable. The science involved, not only the chemical science, but the psychology behind it. It's quite remarkable. Anyway, so these are food manufacturers selling you junk so that they can make money. It has nothing to do with health, and it's got nothing to do with what we're supposed to eat. But back to sort of health span. So health span is that period of time that you live without medication, without medical intervention. And for most people, if you live a good, healthy lifestyle, and you grew up in it, and that's a different conversation for a different day, if you grew up in a supportive, healthy environment as a child, which does actually have massive influence on what happens to you during your adult life, then you should live well into your 60s, 70s, and 80s in good health. That means without pills, without having to see a doctor at all, period. Like, we all think you've got to go and see the doctor all the time. I mean, you know, okay, I'm going to go one last time back to Malawi. There are 20 million people in Malawi, and there are 600 qualified doctors, and around about 3,000 what we call clinical officers. And you think, how do you manage the health of a population with those few people? And the answer is easily, because you don't need them. They're actually healthy people. They walk everywhere. They're all the things that you talked about, traditional lifestyle. They walk from home to the village plot or their own personal plot where they grow their food. Everybody walks everywhere. Everybody goes to bed early. Everybody gets 8-9 hours sleep. There's a certain pace of life. It's not very stressful. People are communal in their living. They sit and talk to each other and share stories in the evening. So it's a very different lifestyle. So I just wanted to pick up on that because it's not really related to diet per se, but it is. But this idea of life span and health span. So you're aiming for a health span, all right? And one of the ways you drive that is through diet. So for me, what I see here, and it's not unique to here, because sometimes we have this conversation, people are, you're hitting on Turks and Caicos Islanders, and you're hitting on this culture, and you're just a foreigner, and you're just a white man, and what do you know? What do you know about our culture? And it's got nothing to do with any of those things, all right? It's to do with facts, and it's to do with science, and it's to do with common sense, all right? Your grandparents lived actually a lifestyle that we should emulate. And I'm not saying we should do away with all the conveniences. It's nice to have electricity, but you should still go to bed at 10. Leave the car at home occasionally and walk to the gym if you're going to go to the gym. Get a garden. As you say, I mean, it's sort of smart. Exercise was something that we just did. Yes. Staying alive. We're required to do things. We didn't have machines to cut the corn or the maize or whatever it was that you were farming. No machine dug the ground for you. You dug it yourself. You had to get there. You had to go fishing, required swimming. You had to row the boat out to get to go fishing. You didn't have an engine. You know, you either sailed it or you rowed it. I mean, that's how you got there. So, and it was just inherent, and people didn't overdo it, and they didn't hurt themselves. They just quietly did it all day long with some rest in the middle. So I guess what I'm saying is, rather than looking back on all that and going, whoa, we should actually emulate that. Yes. With some of and many of our modern conveniences, be grateful that we have them, and then be more modest in the way we do things. Because you're right, I've told patients for years, you can't have harvest home or Christmas every day of the week, but that is exactly what the supermarkets here represent. And people think, because there's been this cultural drift, people actually believe if you don't eat like that every day, somehow that's bad for you, which is like unbelievable to me. So people, when they ask me how many times do you eat today, and I go, well, once, often, yes. And certainly usually not more than twice, they're like shocked. Well, how could you survive? I'm like, well, I'm still walking up mountains and doing yoga and doing all sorts of things that people of my age are struggling to do. And the same with you. How do I mean, you should be a weakling because you're eating rabbit food, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
what they say, bird food.
How could you living off bird food? How could you possibly do 3-4 yoga classes a day? Yes. And I know you do. Yeah, I know you actually do them. Like you actually do them.
I do my classes, yes.
Yeah. So anyway, I guess that's the message I sort of want to push out, which is the one I think you were suggesting too. It's not that inherently rice is bad for you. All right, but a spoon of rice is 2 cubes of sugar. But a Turks Island serving of rice is 16 cubes of sugar. And I tell people all the time, look, if I gave you a bowl with 16 cubes of sugar in it and said, eat that, you'd think I was mad. But that's exactly what you do when you eat the standard, what I call takeout, Turks and Caicos Islands.
Yeah, we have no portion control whatsoever.
No, so your grandmother ate one, and then she took some exercise and burnt it, because rice, rice is sugar, it's glucose, and it's fuel. Okay, well, if you don't put fuel in your car, you're not going to drive it very far. But equally, if you park the car and keep putting the gas pump in and filling it with a gallon every day, nobody should be surprised that the gas starts to fill up the car and fall out on the pavement and all the rest of it. That's what's going to happen. So if you're doing something, you need it. And if you're sedentary, like most people are, you don't. So
you touched on something very small, but I want to magnify it a little bit. It is the concept or the idea that if you start doing these diets or changing your lifestyle, you're emulating the white man, right? Okay, so, oh, I don't want to eat that white food. It's so stupid because they assume that their black food, which is really, the genesis began in the slave era when they were only given the discards of what the master was eating. So why eating the chicken feet, the pig feet, the pig tail, the cow tail, ox tail, It's because those are the parts that were thrown away. And we build up a culture around these throwaway foods. And so back in the day, a small piece of pigtail in the rice gave some flavor. Now, people complain if they don't have 5, 6, or 7 pigtails within the rice, they don't want to buy the food. And so we have now we are all addicts. I mean, really, forget about cocaine and all that stuff there, yeah? It's about people say, oh, I can't stop eating my peas and rice, oh, I can't stop putting gravy on everything, I cannot stop my fried chicken, and I cannot stop my oxtail, I cannot stop my pork and all that stuff, right? So, in essence, then you are in control of your death, more or less. You just saying to yourself, I don't give a shit.
Well, I think more importantly, you are given up on wanting to enjoy a good health span.
I'm glad you said that. I like that because, yes, so you can probably live a long life, but you'll be sick and you'll be at the mercy of the doctors and the pills, and the quality of life, I would prefer to live a shorter lifespan with a better quality of life. And that's what, eventually it'll break down. It happens. That's the impermanence.
Well, interesting thing so you've raised a very interesting topic because you talked about addiction. So I view addiction a little bit differently from a lot of people and the general sort of idea. And I think this idea is beginning to catch on, so it's not unique to me. Okay, so here's what happens to us. As we're growing up as a child, our nervous system and our immune system, so the neuroimmune system, is being programmed by our environment. And that's a complicated topic, and it could be a whole 1-hour show in its own right. But all anybody needs to know is that, if you want, that building of these systems is a hardwired physical event. All right, like this is forever. And so a good example of that would be if you grow up in a house where there's a lot of discord as a child, and there's a lot of worry and fear because maybe somebody's got problems with drugs or alcohol or mental health issues, or there's no money but your parents fight over it. If you live in a house where there's constant anxiety-making environment, if you want, and you feel chronically anxious, why would anybody be surprised that you build circuits that live with you for the rest of your life where chronic anxiety is just an automatic part of your central nervous system operation?
Huh?
You are hardwired. And furthermore, if I took a child and said, all right, we're never going to do anything with this left arm, but we're going to do biceps exercises for the next 7 years with light weight, nobody would be surprised to see no muscle or little muscle on this arm, but a great big right biceps. So that's a very obvious example of how this works. But that goes on in your brain. Okay, so let's go back to addiction. Any addiction. addiction to peas and rice is what we're talking about here, pigtail, and traditional soul foods. People are addicted to them because as you were raised as a child, this is what you were hardwired and programmed to eat. So in that sense, it's an addiction in the sense that you are pre-programmed to eat this. And everybody knows this because nobody cooks like your mum. All right? Even within a culture where we all share the same sort of dishes, nobody quite cooks peas and rice like your grandma or your mum. Nobody. There's a little something she did, because if you grew up in a home in the same place, that's what we're talking about here, that's how you were programmed. And you will never be unprogrammed. So I want to throw that out there, because sometimes people talk about, it sounds a bit judgmental, like, oh, you do this and you behave this way. And I tell people, you don't have any choice. Like if you turn up in my office with chronic anxiety, the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is, let's talk about your childhood. And then I go, okay, you don't have any choice about this. You are going to have chronic anxiety. In fact, we're never going to be able to remove it. We're going to talk about how you can live with it, how you can modulate it, how you can just make it more bearable. And it will actually fade a little bit if you do. Why? Because the analogy I use here is, in Europe, we have lots of Roman roads. Okay, and those who study history will know that Rome was around a couple of thousand years ago, around for about 1,500 years, quite a surprisingly long time. You can still see Roman roads. I've walked on Roman roads in Europe. They're hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old. All right? And they were the main routes. And that was safe, and it's the way you went. All right? But there are lots of little side roads that were not paved by the Romans, a bit like when I first came here to Providenciales. And so there was only Leeward Highway, we all sort of used it, and everything else was dust. But as we've started to use the side roads, because they became paved, Leeward Highway, if you want, has less and less traffic on it. Okay, so when you want to change a habit, you have to sort of build the side road, then you have to practice, and then it has to get paved, and then you'll find it easier to go down the side road. And the more you do it, the more it becomes the primary road that you choose. So in this process of change, diet, behavior, lifestyle, coming to yoga practice or whatever it is, as you start to pave the side roads and use them more often, it gets easier and you're more likely to go that route. And the main road will actually be used less and less. But it will never disappear. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does. So in a way, we have to accept that and manage it.
So that sort of closes the loop, and it's sort of where I want to wrap up now, because it is about managing, and that's what's so attractive to me about the work you do. It's about learning to be aware, and it's about learning to manage yourself, your feelings, your emotions, things that you are hardwired. And I loved your analogy earlier. You know, there are certain yoga poses that I will never be able to do. I don't care if we practice for the next millennia, because physically my body isn't built in a way that I could do it. I will never do the splits. If I practice forever, it won't happen. I don't have the physical ability to do it. So you learn to work within who you are. But what you do need to do, and what yoga does, is it teaches you who you are, and teaches you acceptance, and gives you the skill then to manage the story in your head, which will then have absolute influence on the way you speak and the way you behave. And now suddenly you're empowered to make the lifestyle changes that you want.
Yes.
Because we all want to do it. Everybody would like to be healthier and increase their health span. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Yes, we all do.
Yeah.
We all do.
Yeah.
So
that's
all right.
That's a good start. I hope we get to do this again, because there's so many things that you and I could touch on. Some of them could be, we've talked about this before we did the show. We could get very edgy and actually, and it'd be fun to talk about some things a bit more controversial, but another time maybe.
Yeah, for sure.
So all I'd like to say is, this is great, and we never even talked about Pancha Yoga, which I did not realize is your own discipline that you actually created, which is, well, there's a whole show there, so we'll have to do it. But anyway, I just want to say thank you, and I really hope that people listen into this, and I hope we've changed the way people think about themselves, about practice, and the things that you can do for them. Yeah, there is hope, and that's what my book offers.
And of course, and your book is fantastic. I really highly recommend. It's coming out at some.
So it'll be coming out on the 13th of September, 2022, which actually is in like 4 or 5 days. Be up on Amazon, be audiobooks and all the rest of it. And it'll be available here.
Also audio, also.
Yeah, it's going to be audio. And what's fun is I made a decision to ask a man and a woman to read it. And I've never seen that yet on Amazon. So I've chosen both formats for people.
That's fantastic. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so different people enjoy it. And again, we're back to how you're wired. Some people prefer the female voice and some prefer the male. So it's just give people choice. And I also think it's respectful. So that's how I feel about it.
Well, at some point, hopefully, we can get a few books in here too. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, they're coming. Actually, yes, it's been an interesting day. Before I came here today, I was having a negotiation with the printers, and it's good. It's all good. So there we go.
Okay. Bless.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to, I hope, enjoy what we've been talking about here.
And I want to say one thing. Your health is your true wealth.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And really, we're here not to judge, we're here to help. And I think that's a very Christian concept, not always practiced by people. It's a very Buddhist concept, and I'm not picking on Christians because it's not always practiced by Buddhists, and it's a very Islamic concept. So it runs true through humanity, is that judgment is actually one of the biggest barriers to us all getting to where we want to go, because judgment produces fear. Yes. So don't judge yourself, don't judge others. There is no difference between peoples wherever you come from. And thank you for watching this show. I hope you learned something. My name's Dr. Sam Slattery, and I want to wish you a very good day, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Expect nothing, experience everything.